How are you?
Perfectly
Hello,
fine.
everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode, our weekly Sunday meets. So today is a special episode. It is, in fact, our 100th consecutive episode about all things COVID. So we have decided collectively that we would make this, our last COVID update per se. And we really hope by next week we don't have to talk about COVID. If need be, of course, we will take up the relevant and pertinent topics, but we will be moving on and discussing about how to just, be a healthier individual, talk about a lot of maybe immunology and whatever the need of the hour be. But the sessions will continue just the way they are. We have with us our very own Dr. Nidhi, who has taken the responsibility of these sessions, and she's doing it wonderfully, like Dr. Israni just mentioned. So, of course, she does need no introduction, but just for the sake of starting off the session, let me introduce her. She is the secretary of IMA NDB and the associate medical director of ENT and the head of the safety committee in Shroff Charity Eye Hospital in Daryaganj. She has been doing these sessions with us, and we have successfully completed 100 sessions thanks to her and thanks to all of you. So congratulations are in order for all of us. Today would be the last mandatory COVID update, and then we would take the sessions as it goes. Without much delay, I would request Dr. Nidhi to come forward and conduct this session. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meenakshi. I feel like this is, we have to really begin to understand basics of immunity and virology and take the virus as we would take any other virus, to start living with it and to march with it. Meenakshi, this is host has disabled screen sharing, so आपको मुझे co-host बनाना पड़ेगा.
There you go.
So we will discuss today the immune signature of COVID in terms of the T helper cells, and also discuss basics of virology and how to deal with any virus, not just COVID. These principles are going to be very general today, and we will carry this forward in the coming few sessions. So with the emerging variants, we are finding slightly uptick in numbers in the places which had otherwise gone down. This is, as of yesterday, the government of India statement that the cases are rising, but hospitalizations are low. Now, even in the UK, where the cases have actually not just hit the sky, but penetrated the sky, their analysis says that nearly 58% of the cases were those that were incidentally found to be COVID when they had gone to the hospital for some other treatment, which is interesting because that means COVID per se is behaving like any other endemic virus would by now. And human beings are behaving immunologically like they would with any other virus. And this is a fact that we must learn to recognize, internalize, and begin to accept. If you look at the daily new confirmed cases per million, this is as of 21st of April. Singapore, Israel, UK. These have been the highly vaccinated countries with a very poor tolerance for COVID. Singapore, in fact, had a zero tolerance, but now Singapore has opened up and, in fact, are not even asking for pre-COVID reports on arrival. Israel famously is vaccinating, boosting, reboosting, and reboosting. That didn't stop Omicron. In a way, we would say it is fortunate that it did not stop Omicron, because Omicron has given a robust natural hybrid immunity, which will work well for the population going forward, as has UK. US is a special case, and we are going to have to watch closely what is happening. In India, if you see, the numbers are very low. West doesn't believe this to be so and may not be so. But we have to start moving from infections to disease. Just like we do in tuberculosis, we say that a lot of people could be infected with tuberculosis but are immunologically dealing with it and hence not sick. So it has to be with COVID that it is something that you can encounter and deal with it. If you are not sick, then it does not become a cause for worry. Because as we were discussing that Red Queen hypothesis of immunology, the virus is going to continue to find ways to evade our immunity. And we are going to continue to find ways to deal with the virus. And this dance of one-upmanship, we both have to keep running to be in the same place. The place we are in right now is one which is not making us very sick. And we'll go into the reasons why it is not doing so in the coming part of the presentation. If you look at the number of patients in the hospital, US has had the worst. Now, it could be because their medical system works on admission for reimbursement. It could be because their population comorbidities are high. Obesity is a real epidemic in the US. Lifestyle diseases are a real epidemic in the US. And according to the China study, which China study is a book which came out some 10-15 years ago. It studied populations, huge swaths of populations in India, China, Japan, and the US. Nearly 75,000 people, and came to the conclusion that the lifestyle of US is not just triggering but promoting malignancies as well as metabolic diseases. Their take was that the processed food, largely non-vegetarian diet, and largely sedentary lifestyle is what is driving diseases in the US. The rural Indian and the rural Japanese diet, Chinese diet, the rural Asian diet of largely vegetarianism, occasional non-vegetarianism is in fact protective towards these things. The rest of the countries, Israel, despite its numbers, you see, hospitalizations have been quite close to the baseline. Unfortunately, this data we don't have for India, but Delhi Health Bulletin every day has been showing consistent less than 1% hospital bed occupancy and less than 0.1% ICU occupancy. Similar picture in ICU. If you look at Israel, during Omicron also, they have probably seen a little bit, but as the peak has gone down, so have the cases in ICU. UK, where the cases are maximum, you see this green bulge comprehensively down. So despite the numbers being high, the patients, and I say this with a pinch of salt, patients नहीं कहना चाहिए आप इनको, because आप इनको incidentally discover कर रहे हैं. Confirmed deaths, and nobody believes these figures about India because West has to drive the narrative. And it may be true, we may be underreporting, but because we are not even seeing that many admissions now. So with the hugest population among these countries, we have the least confirmed deaths per million. UK and US are on top of the chart with higher deaths for demographic reasons, I believe. Now, this is a very instructive. हमारे को ये बोला जा रहा है कि हम we're not testing enough and that we are not reporting enough. And so, at a level, I think the West needs to put aside its bias and stop driving the narrative. I think they need to understand that in India, we are able to deal with scale because that is how we run our country. And if you look at this is the number of tests per confirmed case. That means आप कितने टेस्ट करोगे कि आपको पहला पॉजिटिव मिले. We are doing close to 6,000 tests for every confirmed case. So it's not that we have given up on testing. If you look at the rest of the countries, these are in double figures or single figures, which means that the incidence and prevalence are high. That if you do 20 tests and you hit one positive, and if you do 6,000, you hit one positive, that shows the disease burden in the population. It doesn't show that we are doing less. It shows that we haven't given up doing despite getting so many negatives. If you look at the effective reproduction number, and so India was at the bottom of the chart and India has risen to the top, and this is what becomes a matter of concern rather than the controversy on testing and reporting. What we are looking at is UK was at the middle of February around 0.73, rose up to 1.27 when it hit its peak, about 400,000 cases a day. And then UK now is consistently going down, kind of less than 1, which means that their drop is consistent. But if you look at this, they are going up and down. India, on the other hand, went down. It was at 0.35, then it rose up to 0.45, still below 1, then 0.65. But now, as of middle of April, India has risen to 1.32, which means that at least the cases are not decreasing. They might be flattening, they might be increasing, but they are not decreasing. If you look at US, when the US also was around the middle of February at 0.5, rose up to 0.8, rose up to 0.9, rose up to 1.1. So again, there is a slight uptick. So you see both India and US have not only crossed the reproduction rate of 1, but also their graph is on the uptick. Something that we need to watch out for if our hospital systems are getting overloaded. Looking at the world summary. This is from Reuters. If you look at the countries which are reporting the most infections each day, in the last 1 week, you see Germany, South Korea, France, and Italy, but these have also now encouragingly started dropping. US was on the downtrend, but it is now again beginning to rise a little bit. The countries which have reported the most deaths per day, US, but it is again, despite increasing number, the number of deaths are dropping. In UK and Austria, they are saying that the figures are running sort of in a sawtooth up and down manner. So these are not rising or falling, they're kind of staying constant. Russia and South Korea, though it is in the top 5, but falling. If we look at the world picture, Finland in Europe is showing a rise. If you look at this, if you look at all the other countries have a green arrow pointing down except Spain and Montenegro. So the countries which were driving it in the Omicron wave, Germany, Greece, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, even for a while Switzerland, all of them are going down. Latin America, on the other hand, has a lot of upward red arrows. They seem to be having the tail end of the pandemic right now. Australia, New Zealand, if you remember, the last month we have been discussing how they have been flooded with cases, again going down. But if you look at the world summary again, this little bit, this here, this is the white patch at the bottom is Africa. Europe has comprehensively taken over as the lead driver of infections, followed by Asia, followed by US and Canada. Latin America and Caribbean are somewhere around the bottom along with Africa. Mainland China, Taiwan are increasing. They have had a zero COVID policy, which means that their populations are immune naive. For, as I said, for a population that has had 0, even 1 is 100% increase. So when we interpret data statistically, we have to look at what we are using as a denominator rather than, driving the narrative in the wrong manner. There is, however, something that, that concerns me. If China still continues to follow a zero COVID policy and despite the view that a virus like Omicron with all its emerging variants cannot be stopped, what do they know that we don't? Why are they doing it? The reasons may be medical, demographic, political, or economic. We don't know. And that's where the transparency of the country really matters. But if you look at Saudi Arabia is one of those countries which has been most heavily vaccinated. Even Saudi Arabia is showing a red upward arrow. Now, looking at how lockdowns have worked, I've taken workplace lockdown as the measure. United Kingdom today stands at 12% of its peak and falling. There was a point at which they were saying that 1 in 17 or 15 people in UK were infected. The broader band is nationwide and the narrower band is local lockdowns. We are looking at orange, which is requiring closure of some sectors. So you look at the Omicron wave, where there was a nationwide lockdown, which still did not prevent Omicron from becoming what it did for UK. But right now, despite opening up, their numbers haven't gone up to the level that they hit with Omicron. And this is only perhaps now driving population immunity. Looking at India, we are at 1%, less than 1% of our peak, and look at what our lockdown status is. Nothing. Now, despite that, our Omicron wave did not jump over the Delta wave. Right now, our cases are rising a little bit, and we have to keep a close watch, but there are no lockdown measures or no data about any lockdown measures as of now. US, there has been partial lockdown till very recently, yet it has made no difference to the waves. It is around 5%.
अरबी है ना, अरबी को छील के ऐसे ऐसे काटना है लंबा.
We are at 5% of the peak in US and rising despite the lockdowns. The lockdowns are largely local and in sectors. They are not nationwide. Look at vaccination status of the world, and I always put Ethiopia here. Less than a fifth of the, or about a fifth of the population vaccinated. Look at South Korea, nearly 90% of the population vaccinated. India is somewhere here, around 75% of the population vaccinated. The big three, UK, US, and Israel, in terms of vaccination, have in fact made boosters and reboosters mandatory. Number of people vaccinated who have completed initial protocol, just by sheer numbers, we are at the head of the table. Number of people ke hisab se, all these small countries fall somewhere at the bottom. But if we are, if we look at how this plays out on the ground, that slight uptick, which is why Reuters says it is rising, deaths comprehensively falling, active cases plateauing out. But look at the number here. Total deaths plateauing out. If you look at UK, total cases, deaths plateauing out. Total cases, deaths plateauing out. Active case trajectory going down. Look at India, Currently infected, active cases, less than 15,000, deaths plateauing out, new cases, new recoveries, very closely following each other. Very, very closely. Now, we had gone down to a 3-digit average and we have gone up to a 4-digit average. So it's not as if we are out of the woods, but it is time to start treating COVID like we would treat any other virus. We can treat it as a serious virus, no doubt, but we need to start treating it like we would treat any other virus. Looking at the March to April trajectory, the 7-day average in the middle of March was about 3,000. At the end of March, it fell to half that much. Around the middle of April, further fell to less than 1,000. And around the end of April, it has risen again to about 1,779. So it is following a sort of up and down course. The numbers, considering our population, are still very low. We are still hugging the baseline. It's not showing any indicator of sharply rising. And be watchful, but no need to drive panic buttons at the moment. If you look at Delhi, यहाँ पर आपको थोड़ा दिख रहा है. I mean, if we follow this trajectory, it will go up. And it might go up quite sharply. But we need to follow this trajectory over the next coming 2-3 weeks and figure out if we are headed to another wave. For the moment, at least Delhi government's official reports don't say that hospitalizations and ICUs are burdening the system as of now. Uttar Pradesh, again, the new cases are more than the 7-day average, but still very close to the baseline. Now, UP is comparable to US in terms of its population. In the US, we are at 50,000. In UP, we are at 185. The scale is something that we are in Kerala. New cases less than the 7-day average. Now, given the fact that we have to live with this virus, we must understand what viruses really do. What are they? How do we as a species, as human beings, respond to any virus? These viruses, any virus, can be dangerous or useful. Nearly 8% of our own human genome is viral in origin. So they are not always harmful. Viruses are just packets of genetic material. So they hover between the living and the non-living, and the infective particle, the particle which invades the cell, is called a virion. These are obligate intracellular parasites because they use the host machinery to multiply, to replicate. Now, an average human body has about 10 raised to the power 13 number of bacteria residing in and on it. But the number of viruses are 100 times this much. And evolutionarily, we have incorporated certain viral genomes into our own genome. As I said, nearly 8% of our genome is viral in origin. And that is how we have evolved. The immune response to any intracellular parasite is either a Th1 or a Th2 or Th17 response. The response can be, when the body recognizes this pathogen, it can be appropriate, timely, and finishes as the pathogen is taken care of. If the body does not recognize the pathogen, then this response can either be delayed or skewed, or it can result in a hyperimmune response, which is more both in terms of its magnitude and in terms of its persistence. So the Th1 response, what you see on the left of the slide, is largely for intracellular bacteria, intracellular viruses, and it is phagocyte, phagosome mediated immune response. That means that the pathogen is internalized and then we deal with it. Now, this in its hyperimmune state can result in organ-specific autoimmunity like Crohn's or H. pylori gastritis, or even acute renal transplant rejection. There are some unexplained recurrent abortions which are thought to be driven by a hyperimmune Th1 response. If there is predominance of IL-12, interleukin 12, and interferon alpha and gamma from macrophages and natural killer cells, this favors a Th1 response. A strong and persistent Th1 response results in driven autoimmunity and also some chronic inflammatory conditions. On the other hand, a Th2 response is brought into play for intestinal nematodes, some intracellular parasites like malaria. It is a phagocyte independent immune response and results in a strong antibody reaction. But it also has a marked eosinophil activation. Now, interestingly, if you see the immune signature of SARS-CoV-2, both Th1 and Th2 are somewhat suppressed, and the immune response skews towards Th17. And Th17 drives pro-inflammatory thromboinflammation. This, and we have actually falling eosinophils in COVID. Inhibition of several macrophage functions. It's still a mystery where the IL-4 is coming from, but an early IL-4 peak favors a Th2 response, and a persistent Th2 polarization is associated with reduced protection against infections, and it triggers an allergic response and atopy in the body. So if we look at what really is happening in the body in a viral infection, on the x-axis is the number of days after entry of the virus. First, the green peak is production of some interferons and IL-12. This triggers natural killer cells, and they recognize the infected cells and kill them. But these also trigger a T cell mediated killing of the virally infected cells over the next 7 to 10 days in short-term viral infections. Now, if this red line is persistent, if the virus is persistent, then we will have all the cell-mediated immune responses which are in the hyperimmune, hyperinflammatory state. The interferons then are the key driver of our immune response to viruses. Now, if there are no interferons, then the virus infects whatever cell it infects, replicates using the machinery of that cell, kills that cell, and new viral particles are released into the body. But when there is an interferon, the macrophages which have produced the interferon bind to receptors on the epithelial cells, recognizing the cells which are infected and suppress viral replication and hence control the infection. Interferons have several actions. They induce antiviral mechanisms in the host cells. They cause degradation of the viral RNA. So there is inhibition of the synthesis of viral proteins. Hence, there is suppression of viral multiplication. They enhance the MHC1 expression by the host cell. So they mark the infected host cell and enhance killing of these cells by CTLs, cytotoxic killer cells, and natural killer cells. They also activate the natural killer cells and enhance killing by the natural killer cells. So the interferon response to a virus is the key factor in our body's immune response to viruses. In SARS CoV-2, the Th17 and T regulator cell function is significantly altered. This was a study which was done in September 2020. So this was done early in the disease. The immune response, hence, is the dance between the various T cell populations. And it was seen that Th17 Treg ratio or the IL-17 IL-10 ratio were strongly predictive of pathology and decreased survival in COVID patients. There is a significant increase in Th17 in the early variants, which is now not being seen with Omicron. There is an increased expression of cytokines, IL-17 and IL-23, which is driving the Th17. The IL-17 is driving the Th17 response. The RAR-related orphan gamma interferons are again driving the Th17 response. So not only are the Th17 cells more in number and function, but also these are down-regulating T regulator cells. The expression of the marker forkhead Bix protein P3, FOXP3, is decreased. Hence, T regulator cells are decreased both in function and number. There is also then a downregulation of TGF-beta and IL-17, which suppresses further the late downregulation of IL-17 suppresses the T regulator cells. If you remember early in the disease, sir used to say control inflammation by day 3 and thromboinflammation by day 10. He used to say bring CRP less than 10 by day 3 or definitely by day 10. If you miss the day 10 deadline, then you are likely to be in trouble. I would reiterate that whether it is Omicron or it is any other emerging variant, along with your CBC, I would say continue to follow the CRP. If CRP is rising, then do everything you need to do to bring it down. Early treatment, aggressive treatment is what is going to improve outcomes. If, however, patients is the wrong word to use in this case, are asymptomatic or incidentally discovered, then is what we have to figure out our response is going to be like. In SARS CoV-2, historically, in the last 2 years, lymphopenia is driven by decrease in T cell populations marked by CD4 and CD8. There is an immune imbalance with increased inflammatory cytokines and hence a hyperinflammation, which goes into thromboinflammation by day 10. Now, either from here, we can have a resolution of disease or we can have a persistence of pathology. The pathology may be local, as was seen in the Delta variant, the Wuhan variant, and the Alpha variants, or it can be systemic, as is seen with long haul COVID. Mostly, these can be correlated to the Th17 response, which is ROR, gamma, and IL-23 mediated, which induces the inflammatory cytokines IL-17, TNF-alpha, IL-6, and hence, in some cases, as I told you, some skin problems, some cardiac problems, persisting inflammation. Sometimes using non-specific anti-TNF-alpha might work like Trental. T-regulator cells maintain this balance by producing anti-inflammatory cytokines like IL-10, IL-35, and TGF-beta. Now, FOXP3 that we referred to earlier actually aids the development and differentiation of Tregs, but FOXP3 is downregulated by the Th17 response driven by IL-17. So if we look at the molecular basis of what is happening in the pathology of COVID, we find that IL-6 is the main regulator molecule for all intracellular parasites like viruses and intracellular bacteria. Once the virus is phagosomed into the body, into the cell, it activates the cytotoxic T cells, the Th1 and Th17 cells, which secrete perforins and granzyme, which trigger cytokine release. These cytokines have multifarious, multifaceted immune actions, which are pro-inflammatory in nature. Now, if you have come to this stage and neutrophils along with macrophages are activated, extracellular neutrophilic traps, the NETs, neutrophilic extracellular traps, actually cause persistence of the viral infection by trapping extracellular viral genetic material. This persists in the inflammatory clots, the inflammatory thrombus, causing a persistence of inflammation. The reduced T regulators further drive inflammation and damage because they are not able to activate the anti-inflammatory cascade. So the immune imbalance and cytokine-driven hyperinflammation has been strongly correlated with decreased survival. So they did this study in both patients who had died of COVID and those who had improved. And if you see the IL-17, IL ratios are significantly less in those who improved than those who died. The ROR gamma and the FOXP3 are also very significantly different in the dead and the improved patients. The Th17 Treg ratio is even more significantly different in improved and those who succumbed to the virus. The IL-17, IL-10 ratios, these are between the improved and the patients who died. These are between the COVID-19 patients and normal population. So the IL-17, IL-10 ratio in normal population is very, very low. Whereas in COVID patients, the IL-17 is significantly raised. IL-17 is driving Th17 response. Th17 response is driving the macrophage, neutrophil, cytotoxic T cell, natural killer cell, pro-inflammatory, thromboembolic, hyperinflammation. You see this Th17 Treg ratio in normal population and that in the COVID patients. So IL-6 is the main regulator of Treg Th17 balance, and if IL-6 drives Treg down and drives Th17 up, the survival is affected. The IL-6 is increased, which increases Th17 activity and decreases Treg activity. So there is a multitude of biological actions that are being worked on here: immune function, hematopoiesis, and inflammation. IL-6 is also found elevated in autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. So both increased number and function of Th17 cells is driving hyperinflammation, which is persistent. And both decreased number and function of T regulator cells are hampering the ability for anti-inflammation. So not only is inflammation being raised, but also countermeasures are being suppressed. Hence, T regulator cells seem to be the key to understanding improved survival. T regulator cells are marked by CD3, CD4, CD25 high, and CD127 low, FOXP3. This is the immune signature of T regulator cells. These induce immune tolerance and induce counter-inflammation. They prevent autoimmune diseases and may be of two types, either natural or inducible. Natural are called N-Tregs and inducible are called I-Tregs. The natural Tregs develop in the thymus and protect against autoimmunity in early childhood. The inducible Tregs develop outside the thymus, and their differentiation depends as we progress in our life on contact with non-self antigens, on IL-2 and TGF alpha and beta. These inhibit activation of both innate and adaptive immune cells. So we initially need to respond to viruses by a Th1 response. If this response is inadequate or fails, the interferons are going to tilt towards a T17 response. If the body is unable to mount a regulatory Treg population, which inhibits the hyperimmune response, both innate and adaptive immune response are going to result in uncontrolled cytokine storm-like inflammation, hyperinflammation, and thromboinflammation. The Tregs are activated by acute viral infections and create the balance for the Th1 and Th17 cells. They create a pool of memory cells for response at secondary challenge and inhibit the maturation of antigen presenting cells. So they decrease the availability of IL-6. Natural Tregs develop in the thymus and protect against autoimmunity, as we just said. And the inducible develop outside the thymus as we age. The immune response to SARS-CoV-2 and the mechanisms of immunopathological changes in COVID-19 are thus driven by a balance between the IL-2, 6, and 17, between the T cell populations Th1, T helper 1, T helper 2, and T helper 17 with Tregs. The viral cycle has very specific cytosolic and nuclear components. And after the internalization of the virus in the cytosome, it is released with ribosomes taking on the viral RNA. The virus replicates in the cytosol. There is translation of viral polymerases. So these are all steps of what is happening. But interestingly, the viral proteins significantly affect both the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. They suppress the host immune response and they are released into the body. So the immune signature of COVID, in terms of the CBC, what we need to look at. Lymphopenia, less than 20%, initial lymphopenia is predictive of severe disease. This is marked by a T cell. This is a T cell driven lymphopenia. The severe lymphopenia of less than 5% is also a predictor of severe disease and is further driven by CD8 populations. The Th1, Th2 responses, a normal viral activity requires both CD4 and CD8 Th1 response. Severe disease shows a severe inflammatory response with cytokine storm, which is mainly Th1 and inflammatory. When we can control Th1 within the first 3 days, but definitely in the first 10 days, we also can control the storm. But as it moves into an uncontrolled cytokine storm, it activates the NLRP pathway, the inflammasome activation, which further drives the hyperinflammation. Eosinophils are decreased during the initial viral phase, and they may be 50 to 80% of their normal baseline values. In the specific antibody levels in the acute phase, the virus-specific IgM increases, and then it is followed by the virus-specific IgG, which is sort of longer protracted during convalescence. The innate and the adaptive cytokines are released in high amounts and are linked with severe disease and may be Th17 driven. Acute phase reactants are high in severe cases, and initially high values are predictive of severe disease. So D-dimers, IL-6, CRP, all these inflammatory markers, severe lymphopenia, eosinophil drop, all these are predictive of you dealing with COVID. With Omicron, lymphopenia is not very severe, but I'm seeing drop in eosinophil numbers. I am beginning to see a few cases with marked initial CRP, but I'm also seeing a high CRP in persistent and long-drawn COVID. So we will come back to our initial think about, treat the symptoms, control the signs, track the signs, I would say, add that caveat. So you need to control infection. That means prevent a new host to be infected. Control the disease in case a new host gets infected. Early treatment prevents inflammation and progress to thrombosis. So the control measures on a population level continue to be the same. Personal protection depends on each and every one of us. Risk stratification needs to be driven by logic. If you are symptomatic, if you turn positive, please isolate. The less number of new hosts we have, the less number of new variants we will have. Initial vaccination protocol needs to be completed. Boosters need to be seen in view and light of logic. Repeated boosting is also going to be a cause of immune exhaustion, and there are studies to prove so. So early detection and early treatment need to drive a logical way forward. If there is fever, mefenamic acid works better. We are seeing with a lot of Omicron patients very severe throat pain, and mefenamic acid alone does not work for that. I have found Voveran to be very helpful in that kind of throat pain, and Voveran D particularly because it is mouth dissolving, but you can pick the NSAID that you like. Respiratory and nasal symptoms, use H1 block antihistamines of your choice. I prefer loratadine, but you can take cetirizine, levocetirizine, fexofenadine, and your choice. If you think that there is persistent cough and that the cough might be chesty, use bronchodilators. Use them early rather than late. If you think that CRP is high or is rising, and if you have documented that, use NSAIDs, non-steroidal or steroidal measures. Doxycycline and azithromycin are used for their counter-inflammatory action also. Hyperinflammation, if you find that the CRP is rising very high, and if you think that the inflammation is persistent, resort to steroids and colchicine in a very closely followed and guarded manner. Thromboinflammation, use antiplatelet agents, aspirins, and novel oral anticoagulants. If you think that the IL-6 is very high, monoclonal antibodies might still have some role. Antivirals, I have put at the bottom of the list just for the sake of completion, but I don't quite agree with antivirals. I have not put ivermectin here because ivermectin and vitamin D are more preventive. They also are counter-inflammatory. So they would go somewhere here in personal protection and risk stratification. In the end, prevention is really better than cure. And if you want to dodge the bullet, control your own metabolic function, be active, treat chronic diseases adequately, keep inflammation low, try to reach the CRP of less than 1, fortify your mitochondrial health. That is where the key to a good, healthy, long life is. Get good quality and adequate sleep, follow an anti-inflammatory and vagal lifestyle, create health and wellness rather than creating focus towards disease and illness. Trust your body and trust the evolutionary forces, and fortify yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Nidhi, for that wonderful presentation. We've literally been taken back to our microbiology classes all those many years ago. So thank you for doing this with us. The floor is now open for questions. So if anyone would like to make any comments or discuss something, we would love to hear from you. It's the is there?
I think आज फिर वही बात
What
है.
would be the sign, Dr. Manisha Kukreja here?
Yes,
What would
ma'am.
be, what would qualify as immune exhaustion?
Meenakshi, this is your favorite topic. You want to take that?
I couldn't hear her. What was this?
Immune exhaustion. Actually, both of us really like this, but I think you
Yes.
take that.
Just 1 second, please.
Madam, what is the meaning of the zero COVID policy?
Sir?
Zero COVID policy.
Zero COVID policy is when you have zero tolerance. जिस तरह से चाइना के ड्रकोनियन मेजर्स हैं कि अगर घर में एक भी बंदा पॉजिटिव है तो उसको आइसोलेशन सेंटर में ले जाओ. It doesn't matter whether it is a 7-year-old child or it is a 81-year-old man. So they are even a single positive case, they will not allow you to home isolate. They will zero COVID policy is not working because Omicron doesn't care for your zero COVID.
And when you have not mentioned about the monocyte.
Monocytes and macrophages are driving long COVID. They get tainted by COVID antigens and MHC. These are long-lived cells. I did mention monocytes in the last 2 weeks, but I thought today we were dealing with lymphocytes, T cells, and so I did not mention monocytes and macrophages today so much. Dr. Meenakshi, you want to take that question on immune exhaustion?
Immune exhaustion, I think we're talking about the lymphocytopenia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that is very commonly seen in COVID, and usually we, what Sir used to say is that if the lymphocytes are below 20%, that is a sign that, we always used to measure the recovery of a patient when the lymphocytes started increasing. So this is very atypical in COVID because usually in viral illnesses, we usually see lymphocytosis. But in COVID, this is how it somehow, behaved in a very atypical manner, and the lymphocytopenia is what gave us the sign that this patient is going to deteriorate. And with a lot of the patients who were severely ill, we gave them thymosin alpha, and that really gave us a boost in their recovery. Of course, that is not the only cure. There were other things at play, but the boosting with thymosin alpha really helped with the recovery. So, that just sort of, re-emphasized our belief that this lymphocytosis is one of the, not lymphocytosis maybe, but the increase in the lymphocytes, that was a good indicator of the patient entering the convalescence phase.
So in immune exhaustion, not only the number of lymphocytes, but also the function of lymphocytes is getting impaired. And the tilt is towards losing the Th1, which is actually helping us fight the virus, and Treg, which is helping us control the inflammation. So both these cell populations are depleted, both in number and in function. And Th17 is getting marginally raised, which is driving the inflammation and the thrombosis and the cytokines. So that's the exhausted immune state, where the remaining T cells cannot function properly also, and they are less in number also.
So how do you justify this, that repeated boosters would do this? Immune exhaustion, lymphopenia, and down regulation of pH.
I'm not saying that. The studies are saying that. And
Yeah.
why we are saying that is because we know that any foreign antigen is going to incite an immune response. Repeatedly boosting with the spike protein or the likes of spike protein are going to have effects of the spike protein. The European Pharmacological Association or something, European Medical Association, something came up with this study in the last 2 months or 3 months, where they came up with repeatedly boosting actually depletes the available functional T cells for immunity. So that is a marker of T cell exhaustion. And अगर हम SARS-CoV-1 की history देखें तो 20 years ago people who were infected still have markers of persisting immune response. So we have to trust that SARS-CoV-2 with a similar immune signature is going to have a similar immune behavior. Our body's immunity is going to be able to deal with it without repeated boosting. Boosting is not giving us much benefit, or at least a long enough benefit for it to be sensible in an everyday scenario. Boosting gives us benefit only for 3 to 4 weeks. If we are measuring antibodies, it dies out after that and brings you back to the baseline. So अगर आप देखते हैं कि कोई dangerous variant बहुत rampant है, अगर आप देखते हैं कि आपका risk high है, अगर आप देखते हैं कि आपका exposure high है, so even if the risk is not high but the exposure is high in a rising wave for a dangerous variant, boosting might make sense. Boosting doesn't make sense in a variant like Omicron, even if we are talking about XE, for a normal population. Because Omicron itself is actually acting like a boost.
I think just coming up with an algorithm with here, it wouldn't just work, if you because there are so many other factors. So if the person, let's say it's not even a very high risk patient, but then they've gotten infected maybe in the first wave and they've never been infected again. And a booster might work for them. So it's really a very case to case sort of situation, because there are still, people do get scared with all these numbers that keep coming in, and then they come and ask us, should we take a booster, should we not take a booster? So I think that we cannot give a blanket response to this question anymore, because there are so many variables.
I agree, and that's what I'm saying.
May I interrupt for a little moment?
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Puna.
Yeah, ma'am.
I am not very sure if I have got infected. Maybe I could have got Omicron. I am a very well controlled diabetic and I am a GP. So tell me, should I take my vaccine, the booster? I took Covaxin.
Ma'am, I would say that I would say don't.
Even I would agree with Dr. Nidhi that I think that, if you're a very well, and you think that you have no risk factors and you are a very well-controlled diabetic, then maybe you would be able to take this particular variant well, and that immunity, I believe, would serve you better than a booster.
Okay. Because taking Covaxin again, I feel कोई हमें नए वो तो मिल नहीं रहे, नए genotyping या कुछ भी. So what is the big point?
If you get of course, and I'm not promoting anyone going and getting infected or anything, but yes, if you do end up getting infected, then that immunity that you get from that infection, in my opinion, would serve you better than getting a Covaxin booster again.
Yeah.
Of course, if Covaxin comes up with a newer variant of the booster, then it would make sense. But at the moment, just getting boosted with Covaxin for you, if you're saying that you have no risk factors whatsoever, then I think
I
I
think
wouldn't advise it. I completely agree with you.
elderly also having not on antihypertensives, not on anti-diabetics, or a normal weight person who has had two vaccines and then an Omicron can afford to wait even up to 9 months, you see.
Yes, I agree.
Unlike the government recommendation of 90 days, 3 months.
So, ma'am, I would say that what we are looking at really is what just Meenakshi said, that, take a case-to-case deal on this. And even though this is very contrary to public opinion, I'm in complete agreement with Meenakshi that it doesn't matter. What you have to do is examine the clinical situation for a given person. And as I said, agar transplant patient hai, agar immunosuppressants par hai, agar cancer patient hai, immunosuppressants par hai or anti-cancer treatment par hai, agar uncontrolled diabetic hai, frequently bimar hota hai, agar, so those are very special situations.
Right.
And I'm saying and, not or. And there is a rising dangerous variant in circulation.
Okay. Fine.
So what I feel is that so this is something that we can only advise. Now, even with our advice, if with this information the patient wants to take an informed choice of being boosted, by all means.
Yes, I agree.
So, I mean, it is, of course, a risk versus benefit thing. There is no great risk if you are taking the booster, I believe.
Yeah.
But then there's not much benefit also, is what we are trying to say, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.
So just wanted to share, I recently found out that there is, one of our health educators who was a cancer patient. We lost him during Omicron, with Omicron. So, I mean, all those factors do play in. So we need to weigh in all the factors, and it doesn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes to take that history. If someone is coming and asking us for a booster, it does not even take us 2 minutes to find out, what is their COVID history, what is their vaccination history, and what are the comorbidities. That's pretty much all we need to make that calculated decision. And I think that would serve us well in the future.
Totally. Yeah.
Dr. Nidhi, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Just explain more about the mitochondrial health.
Sir, mitochondrial health के ऊपर ना हमने पिछला भी लिया था talk और उसके पहले शायद 1 महीना पहले और लिया था. But long and short of it is कि the inflammation is because there is mitochondrial dysfunction, which is driven by persistent oxidative stress. And जो हम nitric oxide dump की बात करते हैं, the nitric oxide dump exercises, that is an easy way to boost mitochondrial health. Introducing physical exercise to the level that it makes you a little breathless, improves mitochondrial health, using antioxidants in a logical and controlled manner. So what I'm saying is कि कोई भी चीज अगर excessive होती है तो it tends to drive the cortisol rather than the vagal response, the adrenergic and cortisolic response rather than the vagal response. So कोई भी चीज excess में है, that causes a loss of our marginal gains. But the easy things to do for good mitochondrial health are to have good genetics, which is not under control, to exercise a little, to get good sleep, and to meditate a little. all things that Sir used to say.
That means natural antioxidant. That's what you are saying.
No, sir, green tea is very good for mitochondria. Astaxanthin is good. Resveratrol is good. Coenzyme Q10 is critical. So all these things are there, and I have referred to them in the last lecture
Just
also.
last week we've taken this session. Dr. Nidhi has given a very
Sorry, I could not
presentation.
sorry, I could not attend that lecture.
No, sir, that's okay. It's there on YouTube also, but we'll share the link.
Yeah.
Okay. So nice of you.
I have shared the link of the last talk, by the way.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I have seen it. I will
Just
go through
yesterday.
it.
Just yesterday.
Yes, madam, I have seen it. I will go through it.
हाँ, वो Facebook link है, आपको मिल जाएगा. Because I opened it, it ran fine.
Yes, so nice of you. I will go through it.
Madam, what can be done to prevent the Crohn's disease, H. pylori gastritis, and unexplained recurrent abortion?
I don't.
Due to the TH1 response.
I don't have that answer actually. Those are very specialist topics, and I don't have an answer कि हम uncontrolled TH1 response को कैसे control करेंगे. मेरे ख्याल से वो case to case देखना पड़ेगा और directed antibody treatment देनी पड़ेगी, पर मुझे नहीं पता कि वो हम कैसे करेंगे. लेकिन एक blanket अगर हमारे को देखना हो तो जो counter inflammatory measures होते हैं, they will work in this also.
So we used to talk about this pehle ki how we can just that high dose of vitamin D can just sort of tilt the mechanism towards the TH2. So that is something, and even I think Sir had talked about artemisinin. So even that worked on the same principle, yeah.
And I think even pitodimod works on the same principle, but so, taking specifically recurrent abortions and taking specifically, I think those would need to be investigated, and those would need very specific response.
Right. So if there are any more discussions that you would like to initiate, we can do that, or we can call it a week.
And as we were discussing, Dr. Meenakshi,
yes,
we can throw the floor open to our participants. In the next week, we can have a general discussion if everybody wants to, kind of have just a overview maybe. If you still want to have these directed things, then we can continue with the series on virology.
So we could do that. We could have like the 4th Sunday of every month, the last Sunday maybe, and have this
Q&A or whatever.
Yeah, we could do that.
And we're having the session on thalassemia on the 15th of May.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
I want to ask Dr. Nidhi.
Ji, sir.
Next Sunday we can general discussion. So
we could
on COVID.
No, I'm saying, sir, we could. That if that is thrown open to the house, अगर आप चाहते हैं कि कोई specific चीज discuss करनी है, तो we can actually have a Q&A on, or we could even discuss. I mean, we could continue to discuss COVID, but as we said that we probably need to move towards health rather than illness now.
Even for general discussion, we have to specify the topic, so that.
I think we can do the discussion for the topic offline on our group. I think if we can just participate and put in those, because it's usually a little difficult to get the responses online. So offline, everyone is very comfortable just putting in the suggestions, so we can do that. But I think that we've all agreed that we're going to have a group discussion per se next week. We can do that. The topic, I think that is something that we can just choose to discuss offline, if that's okay.
Thank you, madam.
Right. All right. Thank you everyone for joining in, and a big thank you to Dr. Nidhi for doing this with us every week. The sessions that we are taking on Sundays, they're very informative, and your hard work is very clearly evident. So thank you for doing this with us, and a big thank you to all of you for keeping this show alive and joining in every Sunday. We'll be back next week with a newer format of the show, and until then, goodbye.
Thank you so much.